Hello, everyone. This is the Ophthalmology Business Podcast, where we help you develop your ideal practice with help of other doctors and experts. The topics we cover include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindsets, and more. I am Naren Arulrajah, the founder and one of the co-hosts of this podcast. Every listener of this podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmology Business Academy. www.obacademy.org. The membership is on us, and it's our gift to you. Today, I'm excited to talk to Jane Shuman, President and Founder of Eyetechs. And the topic we're going to be talking about is reducing wait times and optimizing patient flow with what Jane likes to call the 4S. Before we jump in, Jane, why don't you take a minute to tell us a bit about yourself? Who are you? How did you get into ophthalmology? And talk about your experience, in ophthalmology.
So that's a very interesting question because I have an unusual background. So I graduated from college as a French education major. Never taught, went into retailing and retail management for several years. I was fortunate enough to be home with my two children for about 9 years, and then it was time to re-enter the workforce. My husband was on the road, and I knew that retailing was not going to work with my schedule, and I wanted a 9-to-5 job. A friend actually found an ad back in the days where newspaper was the primary way of looking for work, found a job as a part-time scribe, will train. And I was fortunate enough to get that job, and the schedule worked out. It was sort of like everything lined up. The days of work were the days that my children had after school issues, and they were willing to train me. And I knew that ophthalmology had very little blood and guts. So I was eager to do it. And like many moms in 30 years ago, I wasn't sure after all this time how I could balance motherhood and a husband who traveled as well as working. And I found that I loved it. Working with adults and having something that was mine created a curiosity in me that I hadn't had for years. So back 30 years ago, I had to tell people what it was like to be a scribe, which is very different from a conversation I had with a friend just yesterday who said, oh yeah, I'm seeing scribes now in this office and the ER department. So I know that scribing has become a thing. Within a year, I was working full-time and learning to be a technician, and ended up over time doing everything in the clinic. I had the different education of working in a multidisciplinary setting. So I saw just how different ophthalmology was. And as I continued to advance, I decided to go back to school for my master's in health administration. Coincidentally, my boss gave her notice. She was retiring the day of my last class, and I applied for the position and got it. And together, the ophthalmologists and I, there were two of them, grew the department into several optometrists and specialty ophthalmologists. And I was able to see just how different ophthalmology actually is. We talk about that quite a bit in our world, but when we were seeing at most 120 patients in a day and running on time, and internal medicine the doctors might be seeing 16 to 20 in a day, with long wait times, I realized that we had something there. So from that point, there's always been a shortage of ophthalmic technicians. So I filled the niche and began training techs locally in the Boston, Massachusetts area. And from there, I continued to work and moonlit as a consultant training, and eventually started looking at flow and efficiency, recognizing how different we are.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, Jane. That was definitely interesting. So you have been in ophthalmology now for how many years?
33.
Right. And then you said 1/3 you work for somebody, 2/3 you kind of have been running your business, which is a consulting and training group, correct?
Correct.
For ophthalmology practices. So the topic today is reducing wait times, right? And optimizing patient flows. So first of all, before we jump into your process, the 4S's and so forth, why do you think this is important in your experience? And can you kind of talk about some of the outcomes you were able to produce in terms of reducing wait times and optimizing patient flows using the 4S? Like what was the before and what was the after?
So the wait times are the number one reason for discontent and patient dissatisfaction. And because we do so many diagnostic tests on site, are not always scheduled, the patient wait times that are and I'm not talking about waiting to see the doctor, but the full amount of time spent in the office can be very long. And this begins from the check-in process all the way through checkout. So what I have seen is that processes are either duplicated or added to. For instance, the check-in forms, I've seen as many as 8 forms at check-in, each requiring patient information and signatures that then get scanned into the practice management system. So by combining those into one, putting them online, doing things proactively, we are immediately reducing that wait time for new patients by 15 to 20 minutes. If you think about it, we're dealing with people with poor vision. And many of these forms are written in small font with poor contrast. And we're very often asking questions that the patient doesn't even understand. So by combining some of the permissions and acknowledgements into one form, or even into a form that requires electronic signature, and taking that medical history form into the interview with the technicians, you're now eliminating redundancies and saving time.
Right. One of the idea that just popped into my head is a lot of times if we know the why behind what we asked to do, we will comply. And a lot of people don't explain the why, right?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's a proven tenet of mine when I'm training techs, because if they understand why they're doing something and what an abnormal finding may mean on the workup, they're now able to become a more critical thinker and help the physician pick up diagnoses that may not only be ocular, but may be systemic.
Right. So you're a big on whys. Like for even now, we talked about, why even think about improving, reducing wait times and optimize patient flows. And you clearly articulated why, like you said, that's the number one reason patients are dissatisfied. And you talked about the results. So I think why is a very good thing for as humans to buy into something, to get committed to something. So, and do you do that with patients as well? Like even with patients, like, why do you want me to fill all this? Why do things take longer at ophthalmology office versus, I mean, is that kind of part of the training, like really kind of helping the patients understand what's going on and why it's going on and so forth?
I have not been asked anything directly like that by the patients.
Right.
But when I can communicate to the staff why we're doing something, they can now answer appropriately if they're queried the same way.
Got it. Makes total sense. So let's jump into the details. What are the 4S's? And once we talk about that, let's talk about how that impacts or improves patient flow.
So the 4S's are space, staffing, scheduling, and systems. And the reason they're important is because it's like a jigsaw puzzle. If you have a piece of the puzzle missing, it won't be complete. And all four of them work together to create a good day. It's not foolproof by any means, but we've been able to reduce wait times quite a bit. The ways to put this puzzle together is really to walk through the office as a patient and see where redundancies are and how to save time. So the definition of efficiency includes the amount of input necessary to get the best output. So that includes steps that you're taking when you're redoubling your efforts, walking to the back of the clinic for your workup, then back to the front for a diagnostic test. You can save a whole lot of time by doing the diagnostics on the way to the workup room. That's just one example. Another would be keeping like instruments together so that patients who are coming in for a cataract consult would have all their diagnostic tests that are relevant in one area or room of the office.
So that's that example that you just shared with me is around space. Give me an example for each one of the S's. So staffing.
Okay. So that was for space. For staffing, we're looking at the proper number of people based on the number of patients expected and the number of doctors that they're servicing. But also for staffing, we want to make sure that they can do as many jobs as are appropriate for their skill level. I'm a huge believer in cross-training because when people can step into another job within the clinic, the flow will continue to move forward. But instead, let's say you have only diagnostic technicians and the workup people don't know how to operate that equipment. If there's a lineup for testing because one of the diagnostic testers called out, no one is able to decrease those wait times by stepping in on the tests. So that's your staffing. Your systems are not necessarily the electronic connection or software that is used in the office that we often think of, but the processes to get something done. So a good example of that is to have workup protocols so that all technicians know what to do based on the reason for the visit. It's not enough to say, verbally, this is what we do, but rather we want to condense the skills that are provided that are based on the reason that the patient is there. So every technician should be on the same page according to what each doctor wants. So for instance, a short glaucoma follow-up really only needs a brief history, a pressure, a vision, a pressure, and perhaps a previously ordered diagnostic test. We don't need to do all the other elements that are included in a comprehensive exam. And for schedule, this is often the bane of a practice. A doctor believes the schedule should reflect how he can see his patients. But in actuality, where the technicians are on the front end, I believe that the schedule should primarily reflect the technician's workup times, the average amount of time, and it should be a balanced schedule of longs and shorts so that the doctor is able to remain in clinic, seeing his or her patients, and not in her office waiting for the next one to be ready.
Thank you so much. What's the best way to evaluate if space is working efficiently?
As I said a little while ago, to really walk through the office, perhaps with a brand new patient, and see where are they going. Let's track where that patient is moving and in what order. Because, like I mentioned, if you can put like diagnostic instruments together and you have a room that is fully equipped, working equipment, fully stocked, you're going to eliminate the amount of time someone has to leave to get an instrument or even a box of tissues.
Right. Makes sense. Let me talk about scheduling for a minute. I know that's one of the 4 S's. Is there a perfect scheduling template?
I'm asked that question quite a bit. No, because we are dealing with people, and patients arrive early, they arrive late. Our staffing may be short on a given day. There may be an emergency that disrupts the entire session. However, there is no hour should be filled with more patients than the doctor can see in 60 minutes. So we often have to begin with a time study. What that means is if he's got 10 patients in the first hour, if he is not on average spending 6 minutes with each patient, he's going to be running behind at the end of the first hour. So that balance is one of the prime considerations. We also want to use the space based on how many doctors are in the office. So if there's a procedure room and some lasers are being done in the office, for example, and you've got 3 doctors in, then let's make one session for one of those doctors a procedure session. That way, that doctor will have a limited amount of staff and know what they have to do for each procedure or laser. And the other doctors have the full use of the exam lanes and the remainder of the staff. So one doctor's schedule impacts the others as well.
Right. No, this is great.
Thank you.
Appreciate your insights. Before we wrap up, I do have one last question. How does a practice determine what efficiencies are needed. So, you walk in, you go into a practice, and I'm sure like you're trying to figure out what are the low hanging fruits? Where can I make the changes that would have the largest impact?
So I do start with the low hanging fruit because there are always some doubters among the staff and sometimes among the physicians as well. So very often the first changes that I make are at the check-in process, because those are quick. Some of those changes can be done on site. And while I'm on site, and when staff sees that they are actually working, they get excited and they start to contribute and think about eyes or improvements. And within the clinic, I may be able to say, each technician is leaving the room to get a tonometer. And why? So every time they leave the room, it's taking an additional 2 minutes. So it may be justification to buy another handheld one so that all tech rooms can be supplied accordingly.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. I really learned a lot today, listening to you and reflecting on what you have been saying. And I think our listeners would really benefit from your 33 years of experience in ophthalmology. I guess that is power to wisdom. So they don't have to make the mistakes. They can hopefully do things without learning the hard way by making mistakes. Thank you, Jane, for your time today. And thank you for talking about reducing wait times and optimizing patient flows with the 4 S's. We appreciate it very much. We'll include in the show notes information for people to visit your website, perhaps reach you. So anyone who's interested can follow up with you and maybe ask you additional questions. I also want to take a minute to thank our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. If you do like our podcast, please share it with your friends and on social media. And please don't forget to write a review on iTunes or Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. Till we meet again, wishing all of you an amazing week ahead.